usually what I like to show in this class is advanced endings. And today we're going to look at some of the concepts of pawn endings that I think are not only instructive and maybe sometimes complicated, but I think they're also very pretty and beautiful. But in order for this to work properly, my first question is, does anybody or everybody here know how to win or draw king and one pawn versus king? How many of you are familiar with that concept? Like if I put a king and a pawn on the board and two kings and a pawn, one side has a pawn, no matter how I set them up, you will immediately know if it's a win or a draw. How many of you think that they're confident of that? With one pawn, king and one pawn. Okay, most of you. Okay, so for the sake of doing a proper job, I am going to just super quickly deal with that. So for example, a position like this should be well known. No matter who is on the move, this is always a draw, right, going down the board. Why? Because black has a very simple strategy of waiting, opposing, until the board ends. So if it would have been black to move, he would have just played a waiting move. If it's white to move, he's going to play some move. Black waits. I wouldn't wait this way. I always want to wait this way. When white eventually has to show himself, we oppose, check, block, have to defend the pawn. Waiting move, eventually you have to make progress, oppose, check, block, defend your pawn, until we get to the end of the board, after which this is stalemate. So this is very, very easy. The next position, okay, now the right to move is very important because whoever's on the move, that means that his opponent just gained the opposition. And opposition is when the kings are opposite one another with one square or uneven number of squares. Close opposition is one square, distant opposition is another odd number, 3 or 5 or 7. In this case, of course, this is white to move, and that's going to be a draw. Why? Because he's going to go one side, let's say, and you're going to oppose. And if we dance, if we dance like this with our kings, we can do this forever, etc. Eventually, white has to push his pawn, and then when the king blocks, what do we have? The very same position we showed before, with the king behind his pawn, or on the same level of his pawn, is the same thing. You'd have to advance, and I'm going to wait, and you have to show, and that's the stalemate we saw before. If this, however, would have been black to move, he would have lost. So let's pretend for a moment that I'm going to play badly for black, just to show. And here, here, here. Already you can see that when black would choose one side, white would choose the other, and eventually the pawn will march in all the way to the queen square. Okay, do we understand that? Okay, one last thing to talk about is that if the pawn, let's say, is on d2, if you can imagine the pawn here, then the right to move does not matter anymore. Because white always has a tempo. If it's his move, he gains the opposition. And if it's black to move, he's just clearing the way, the path to the pawn like we saw before. You just have to count. It's a very simple task of counting. So with that in mind, this is very relevant to some of the positions we see today. That's why I have to start with that. So we are going to start with actually something that's kind of funny. Has nothing to do with pawn endings, right? But this is a good lesson if you want to teach someone opposition. This is a great way to teach someone the opposition. Of course, we know that this is a win for white because he has an extra rook, right? But this position comes with a prerequisite, and that is white can only move his rook once. You can only move your rook once. You're not allowed to move your rook more than one time. So basically, you're only going to move it when you deliver checkmate. If you touch it before, you squandered your chances. So as you can see right now, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Even number of squares between the king and the two kings. So white starts by gaining a distant opposition. Now there are 5 squares, so an odd number of squares between the kings. And now you'll see that black has some dilemmas. For example, king b8 is what he played. If he was to play, let's say, king to b7, then what would I do? Where would I go in order to have an odd number? Let's say I go here. Okay, king b3, and there are 3 squares. And we are making progress. And you will see that this is the way you're going to push the king to the corner. Let's try it with the best fight that black can offer. King b8, and white plays king b2. So now you might be wondering, wait a minute, how is this going to lead to anything? Because he's always going to dance. And let's see, he's going to go to a8. If he goes to a7, then like with the case of king b3, we go here. and then here, here, and again we get to the same position, just one rank up, which is going to happen anyways. So after king b8, king b2, king a8, now white uses his c file. King c5. He just, again, he flanks. This is one of the things with opposition. If you imagine there's a pawn between the kings, you always want to be when you're trying to win, when you're on the winning side. When your opponent goes one way, you want to go another way, and then you clear the path of the pawn. Here there's no pawn, but there's just opposition. So, again, what can you do? In the case of king a7, excuse me, then you just go king c4. You just keep climbing on the c file. And you're going to just outflank it, and the rook is going to give mate on the a file. So that's easy. Let's pretend that king goes to b7. Now, what move should we play? Again, distant opposition is measured by an uneven and odd number of squares between the kings. Yes? Yes, king to b3. I'm sure all of you thought about that. Now there's an odd number of squares between the kings. So what can the king do? King a7, let's say. And now we march king c4. Again, because staying on the same place is not going to work. If you're going to go king here or king here, then the king is just going to oppose you. And then it's going to be a dance like this forever. If you try to cross, he's going to cross the line. Right now the king is boxed in thanks to this rook. So, okay, king b8. And now, raise your hands if you want to say it. You? King to b4. Once again, an odd number of squares between the kings. That's how you gain the opposition. So, king a8, of course, king c5. Again, I have to go to the c file, because if I go to a4, he's going to go to b8. What did I achieve? Nothing. He's not going to go up. And if I go up, he's going to oppose me. So no. So again, he went one way. We're clearing the way this way. Eventually, he goes here. Now it becomes really easy. King b5. Only one square between them. That's the classic opposition. And now two choices. He can go here, he can go backwards, we'll just chase him. Here we're just going to go king c6. Again, you notice how one flank, we choose the other. If he goes king a6, rook a1 is mate. So he has got to play king b8. If he goes king a8, then king c7, and next move, it's mate on a1. So he's got to go king b8. And now I'm sure everybody can see this move. We pushed him to the edge of the board. He has one legal move, and checkmate. Again, a very nice puzzle. If you think about it, it's instructive, not because it's cute. I mean, it is cute, kind of. You can move your rook. I mean, that's not really a chess rule. But when you want to teach someone in opposition, this is a great exercise. They enjoy themselves. It's kind of a challenging trick. It's beyond chess. It's logic. And you also learn about the opposition. Okay. So we are going to eliminate this one. And our next puzzle is going to be this. Yeah. This is a position for a very famous game between Capablanca and Edward Lasker. Not Emanuel Lasker, who was world champion for 27 years, but Edward Lasker, Ed Lasker. And here Ed Lasker with black could have held a draw against his opponent. Of course, he understands that in this position, forget about the number of the pawns. White has two pawns running down the board right here. You better find a way to stop them. And he didn't. He understood that he has to stop them, but he didn't do it in the most efficient way. Okay, in the game he played the move king e5. Two question marks. And the reason is, he probably thought, well, what's going to happen? If the king moves away from my pawn, great. If he pushes the g pawn, then I'm just going to take and go king f6 and win the pawn. Maybe even win the game, because I have an extra pawn. But all of a sudden he saw the move h6, and now the king cannot cross anymore because of his own pawn and the f pawn, and there's no way to stop g6 and winning. So he had to resign. He lost. If he would have been a little more careful, he would have seen that after the simple move king e6, king takes here, f4, he keeps the white king busy simply by sending his own pawn. And after here, 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 he reaches the pawns. After g6 takes. If you play h6, I'm stopping the pawn. So probably white would have to take the pawn on g6. And then, of course, with a rook pawn, we know it would be a very simple draw. You will see why this is important in a second. I'm going to show you more positions that are somewhat relevant to that. Now we're going to see another position. By the way, any questions? I might be going too fast. Tell me if I'm going too fast. And also, please tell me if you have any questions on the position. But I'm sure that in this position, you guys understood the difference between king e5, where he gets stuck because this pawn just doesn't move. It's this pawn that moves. And then who cares about losing a pawn if you're about to make a queen? Well, this move would have just taken care of everything. Like after this, if he does this, of course we have this move. This is only a way for white to lose, not to win, because he's going to lose all pawns. Okay? Okay. So. We look at this position. We think to ourselves, well, each side has a king and a pawn. Looks a bit messy. It looks like white has the outside passed pawn on the a file, but we know it's a rook pawn. And also it seems like the king is in the box. What does this mean? That the king has no more than 4 squares between him and the pawn. So if the pawn just marches in, a4, king here, a5, king here, a6, king here, a7, king here, I'm stopping the pawn. Very easy, right? I cannot just run with my pawn. So white needs to use another system. And you'll see that white does it in a very elegant way. King f5, very, very logical. He is stopping the king from coming on the diagonal that saves the pawn, and also preventing him from running with his pawn. But everything has to be very accurate, because as you will notice, oh, and that's something else I should have actually asked you, and that is to tell you that many times a queen ending, when the queen, one side has a queen, and the other one has a pawn either on the rook file, a7, h7, h2, and a2, and or the bishop file, c7, f7, f2, and c2. If the pawn is on the 7th rank, it's very hard to win. Many times it's a draw. If your king is not close enough, it's going to be a draw because of stalemate possibilities. Like if you can imagine, if my king, my black king is here in the corner, and the white queen takes this pawn, it's a stalemate. You cannot easily win the pawn. Or in exchange, if my king gets to the corner with a rook pawn, and I have a pawn here and there's a king here, you have to always, you cannot just jail me here forever and bring your king, because it'll be a stalemate. Do you guys understand, or should I show you? I'll show you very. So a position like this is a draw. Why is it a draw? Because, well, here white, of course, will queen. But let's pretend I just make a move to turn the pass the turn for black. When you make a move like this for black, a move that normally would do one of two things: either win the pawn, or force you to block the pawn, in which case the king just slowly advances. That's what happens if the pawn is here, 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 or here. But in this position, I can afford to play here. I'm just telling you, well, I'm about to queen my pawn. You want to take it? Take it. And it's stalemate. You understand? If the king is close, well, you will see that it can play a part. Another thing to remember, so this is also a draw. The king is too far, and the reason now is because after, let's say, check, king here, normally when you block the pawn, the black king can advance, but now it's going to be stalemate. So there is no way to both stop me from queening the pawn and forcing me to block it so the king can advance. The king can advance. So now if you make a king move, it's stalemate. And any queen move that breaks the stalemate, let's say here, then I'm just going here and I'm queening the pawn. So that's why these are a draw. Now why is it relevant to our position? You will see in a second. White goes king f5, king e3, only move, king e5, and now he has to play c6. If you play king d3, then after king d5, king c5, and my pawn, now I just blocked your pawn, and there is no way to stop the a train, a4, a5, a6, a7, a8, I'm making you queen. That is just academic, that's very simple. So in this position, he needs to play the move c6. Now he doesn't let the king cross, but his own king wants to keep the chase going. So now white plays a4, what else is left? King d3, a5, of course the king already missed that boat, he cannot stop the pawn, but now he can push his own pawn, but it cost him dear time. a6, c4, a7, c3, a8 queen, c2. Now, all we need is like one more move with our king closer, and it's going to be a draw. So if you, let's say, if you go queen a1, trying to stop the queen, from the pawn from queening, I'm going to go king d2, that's already a draw. Forget it, you cannot win anymore. Is that understood? Yeah, this is very, very annoying. So also, other moves are going to be tricky because where are you going to go? But look at the way he wins. He wins in a very nice way. He goes queen d5 check. This is the most important way to win. Now, all the king moves are really, really bad. For example, let's examine the moves. The main line goes king e3, we'll see it last. If king c3, simply check. And here, once you do that, once you take away the queening square from the axis of the king, then of course it's winning. Because my queen is just going to stay here forever, and then my king is going to come close, 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 and the pawn is going to be lost. Even if my king is like as far away as here. But that's easy win. Alternatively, after king e2, again a beautiful way to remember how to win. Queen a2, pinning the pawn. The king has to go to d1. Otherwise the pawn will stay pinned. And now the beautiful part comes. King d4, you make a queen. King d3, and even though it's king and queen versus king and queen, there is no way that you can stop mate. There is no way. I'm threatening mate on e2, and any queen move, any queen move that you will notice will lead to mate either in the back rank, of course, or one of those squares. So it's winning. Totally winning position. Good to memorize this kind of position because this occurs a lot. Lastly, after the aforementioned check, if king e3, now comes a really beautiful idea. Again, a beautiful concept because, well, he wants to queen. If the queen tries to take care of it somehow, then the king is going to drop back and threaten to queen again. So for example, queen a2 doesn't work because it's not pinned, it's going to queen. If you go queen c4, I'm just going to go king d2. And if you let me run all the way to the corner and give you that pawn, that's exactly what I would like to do. But in this position, and if the viewers at home want to kind of try it, so pause the video because I'm about to show the move. Beautiful move, beautiful concept. Queen g2. Just a very elegant trick. And the point is that after the pawn queens, well, of course, if the king moves away, I'm going to play the same move. So if here, I'm just going to check, skewering the king and the queen. Bye-bye, queen. And alternatively, if you try to save it by playing king d3, I'm going to play here. And like I said before, once I occupy the square and your king cannot get there, it's lost. Next move, I'm going to play queen here to c1. So let's see you play here, trying to come here. I'm playing here. Beautiful ending, nice composition. Again, review it very, very super quickly. In this position, white rushes and black must stop the king. This cost him time. And now the important check, queen to d5. And we saw that there's three different motifs. One, the queen gets immediately to control that square. The other one, the queen pins the pawn and the king comes closer and there's a mate net. And the third one, when the queen attacks the pawn and there is a skewer on the long diagonal. Understood? Cool. I know these are advanced, but this is the kind of endings we're doing today. Advanced concepts in pawn endings. Okay, the next position is again by the same composer. Again, a very beautiful idea. When you look at this position, you think to yourself, well, this is an obvious pawn race. Each side has an outside pass pawn, or like a distant pass pawn, and it looks like white has to play g4, and then b5, g5, b4, b3, I mean g6, b3 check. The king has to move, then b2, and then you queen first, and white will queen with check. That's just going to be a draw. So let's examine it. Here, 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 check. I better go away. Advance, here, queen, queen, check, and draw. I can just go queen b3 if I want to just it. It's just a draw. But white is not interested in a draw in this position because he has a beautiful trick. Watch what he does. He does what we call a little staircase trick. He goes up and then he goes down, and watch why. First of all, he goes here. Yeah. I mean, other than king a3, I don't know what else to suggest. Now I just want to march my g pawn forever and your b pawn is stuck. If you go b5, I'm just going to go king b4. Then the pawn is stuck and there's no way you can stop my pawn. You're too far. So you must come to support your pawn. Now white plays king c4, again, teasing. He's about to go king b5 and take this pawn. So, forced, that's the up part. And now we start marching. Here, it looks a little illogical because of the check tempo, but when you will see, you will understand. So check, king d3. Again, a very cunning move. Not king c3, when after king a3 there's going to be another check. but we just want to go this way, and this time we want to block the pawn. So if you push the pawn, I'm going to go here. If you go here, I'm going to go here. And now, again, you cannot stop my pawn, and my king is just standing there like an annoying guard bouncer, right? So after king d3, king a3, again, he has to spend that tempo. g5, b4, g6, b3, g7, b2. He's ready to queen with check. But what do? We, again, go back, pretending that we're stopping the pawn. And when the black king is lured to this diagonal, we queen with check. And winning. Very aesthetic. When I look at this ending, I've seen it so many times. Every time I see it, I feel like it's really beautiful. Just a beautiful way. It looks like with only 2 pawns left on the board, how much life there is to this position. Again, you don't just rush with your pawn, but first you bring your king up, which is somewhat counterintuitive. Then you go down, but you have to be careful not to allow checks. And then you lure the king to the point where the queen's with check. Now black is not going to get to save his pawn. Of course, after king a3, we can just win the pawn. Oh, it's checkmate, actually. Even easier. The computer was smarter than me. Yeah. Okay, on we go. Let's eliminate this one. And now, let's see. Which one did I want to show first? Oh, this one, yeah. This is nice. Again, a beautiful, beautiful idea in pawn endings. When you look at the position at first, and I have to tell you, when I saw it many, many years ago, I was in panic. I thought to myself, what a mess. How can I even calculate? There's so many legal moves. I can play a million pawn moves. I can play king moves. How can I even reach the solution here? And then I said to myself, like I always tell my students again, please ask yourself the right questions. What do you want to do? What does your opponent want to do? What must you prevent? And it becomes very, very obvious. Again, if we had a very long lecture of many, many hours, I could just let you think about it and we try to solve it. But instead, let me guide you to it. One thing is that if white is going to do something well, if white is right to move and win, why would he win? I mean, this pawn is not passed, this pawn is not passed, this pawn is not passed, but the a pawn is passed. If I can somehow get this guy to here, that'll be quite nice. However, black has his own threats. And one would be very wise to pay attention to those positions, because if I'm rushing with my pawn, and he's going to, let's say, take it en passant, and take, now I'm ready to again roam again, he's going to go king here, and all of a sudden I'm losing. Because after a4, h5, a5, h4, la, 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 mate. Oopsie. Big accident. So, now we understand. The pawn on g2 has to go. Definitely has to go. But, now we see another annoying thing. If we take the pawn immediately, and the king starts running for the defense, then he stops the pawn. Look, after a4, takes, and he goes king f6, a4, king, here, 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 here. He's in the box. He stops the pawn. How frustrating. Really, really annoying. Who wants him to stop the pawn? It's really, yes?
I have something to solve the problem.
Okay, wait a second. Well, we're not in competition now. We are just trying to explain it. So we learned 2 things that are very important. 1, we cannot rush with our pawn first because we're going to get mated. 2, we cannot eliminate this pawn immediately because the king is going to have a route to escape. Therefore, by process of elimination, we understand that we have to, because we're going to have a new queen. If we have a new queen, anything else we can sacrifice, right? We don't need all the riffraff, right? There's a collateral damage. So, step 1, f6. At first, if I play this move without explaining, you would say, Aviv, we drinking or what? What is this, giving a pawn for no reason? But now you guys understand. I'm killing 2 birds with 1 stone again. I'm not getting mated because my pawn is super fast. There is no time to play king g3 and pushing the h-pawn. I'm going to make a queen and kill him way before. And on the other hand, I'm already taking away the escape route from the king. So f6, he's got to take it. And now again, king g3 is threatened, so I got to take the pawn. Beautiful. So step 1 has been achieved. We have eliminated the annoying g-pawn, and it's not easy for black to stop our pawn now. But he's going to try. King g5, and now a4, like expected. The pawn starts running, but it's not so simple. Of course, he's slowing it down by taking en passant, and we take back. Again, the A pawn, the A train is ready to move, so he goes king here. Now, again, we notice that the A4, king E5, A5, takes, A6, king C6, he stops the pawn. He took our pawn, he's going to stop our pawn, he's going to win. That's not very good. So what do? A4, king E5, and now we must interject something. We must do something because on A5 he just takes it, so no good. So what should we do? Should we push the D pawn or should we push the C pawn? What do you guys think? I want you to really stop and think for a second because one of them wins, the other one loses. Yes? Okay, but then what do you think white will do? I mean black will do. I can take it because you're going to go A5, right? Yeah. I mean after C6 if I take it, you're going to go A5 and you achieved exactly what you wanted. The pawn marches in. But if you go C6, I'm going to go D6. And after A5, king takes D5. A6, king takes C6. What happened? I stopped the pawn. I reached it, right? So the correct continuation is to play D6. Now he is stuck because I'm about to take his pawn. If you go C6 now, you won't be able to cross in time. So he's got to take. And again, it's time to be very accurate because A5, king D5 stops the pawn. So he gives up another pawn. Beautiful. And after pawn takes, A5 and the pawn queens. So at the end of the exercise, black is up 3 pawns, but he has a little problem. He cannot stop the pawns. The one pawn that I have left. So again, from the top, we understand what's going on. We want to queen our outside passer. We don't want to get mated and smothered by this king and his pawns. What do? We can't push the pawn immediately. We can't get rid of the pawn immediately because he stops our pawn. So we interfere with his escape route. After here, here, and now bam. Giving up 2 pawns to take away the 2 squares the king so desperately needed in order to try to stop our pawn. Understood? Great. Any questions before I get rid of it, or? Okay. Okay, our next position is going to be related to breakthrough. And let's start with this one. Okay, for now it's not yet a pawn ending, but it's going to become a pawn ending. Here, when you look at this position is a position that I showed some kids that I'm teaching. And it's like, this is a black to move and win exercise. If you look at the position, it's a bit confusing. It's obvious that black has a beautiful chain of pawns on the queen side and a proud knight in the center. The white knight, however, is looking very sad. Of the 4 possible squares that he can go for from D1, 2 are his own pawns, and 2 are covered by the pawn, the black pawn, so the knight is not moving. However, my king is attacking, the white king is attacking the black knight. So the question is what to do. If you go back, then maybe this king is going to come and save the day, right? It's going to become an active king. So black plays a beautiful move that wins the game. Knight to C3. And again, why? Because he understands that by giving away this knight, one of 2 things will happen. Either he's going to win the white knight because that knight cannot move and it cannot be defended. That's a big problem. On the other hand, if he takes it, then the pawn is just going to queen. So if knight takes knight, excuse me, pawn takes, threatening the pawn. If you take, I'm just going to go A4. There's no way you can stop the A pawn. I'm just marching in, and in. The king is just too far. Some of you might say, okay, maybe I can just take it with my pawn, which is what he did. And black simply played A4. Again, marching with his pawn. He's about to queen his pawn. Now what to do? How to stop the A pawn? It's impossible. He tried to play C takes D4. Now he's really hoping maybe black will blunder by rushing with this pawn, and then knight C3 is going to come. And he's blocking it right on time. But black says, hey, I can take the time to just take back, make sure that my pawn keeps you really honest here, you cannot stop. And of course now he's losing. He tried to play the move C3. Again, praying maybe by some miracle Black will play d takes c3, but of course black had none of that. Simply marched his pawn, and white had to resign. He's going to be down a queen. He's going to be down a queen in just about a second. Yeah. Did you understand the concept of breakthrough? Let's see more example of that. And more examples. Let's take a look at this game. When you look at the position, you think to yourself, it looks to me like white is up a pawn on the king side. And the rest of the pawns look really blocked. But sometimes when you have double pawns, that opens up the door for a chance of a breakthrough in a pawn ending. And there are many examples. This is just one of them. Obviously, the black king is not about to move away and let white try to queen his pawns. That's completely useless. What he is going to do is just use the pawns as they are to create a pass pawn. It might look impossible because you say, wait a minute. How can you possibly cross? Any pawn that you push, I'm just going to be able to take. But the thing is, all you need is one pawn left to queen. Who cares about the rest of the pawns? So he played c4. Beautiful. It looks like a crazy move. What the heck? How can you play a move like this? I can take it two different ways. However, when you take a closer look, you quickly realize, wait a minute, this is just amazing. I cannot take with the b pawn. That's kind of obvious. If I take with the b pawn, a4, and that a4 express is going in. So you might ask, wait a minute, okay, that's easy to understand. But what if I took with the d pawn? Then once again, the idea is just to create a breakthrough, just to get one pawn to do a touchdown. And you think to yourself, okay, which is going to be the pass pawn? It cannot be this one, and cannot be this one. It has to be this one. But if I push it and takes, that's nothing. So push. Again, I just want to march in. You got to take it. I'm pushing the other pawn. I'm sacking everything. And after takes, d3, and I might be down 2, 4, 6, 7, 4 pawns, but my pawn is about to become a queen, and all your pawns are too late, they're too far. My queen is just going to sweep them up and win. Was that understood? Also, I should say, some of you might still say after c4, can white play the move king g3, just not touch the pawns? And now, of course, any capture is just going to lead to a dead end. Any capture is nothing, but now black simply insists on a pawn. Now I want to go a3, and then I want to go a4, a2. So he's got to take, and now, bam, just breaking the foundation. I'm threatening b takes c2. You better take me. And then c3. Once again, a pawn reaches the margin square. Again, the king is too far. King f2, c2, king e2, I make a new queen. Beautiful, a beautiful idea of breakthrough. Is that understood, or are there any questions? Okay. One more example of that is from a real game, and I found this really, really cute. In this game, the position should end in a draw. I mean, this game should end in a draw. In all honesty, the black king is very strong. The white king is okay. He's just enough. He's just in time for stopping him. So black decides one last trick. He retreats. He just goes back. You'll notice that g4 or b4 just don't work, or h4 don't work in that position. My king is just too close. So watch what he does. He lures the white king to come further. So white plays here, here. He chases him and chases him. So far everything is good. Here and here and here. And white thinks, hey, I'm actually going to win because I'm corralling this pawn. And he played king c6. However, this is a losing blunder. Just when he thought that now, hey, the king has no moves, he has to let go of the pawn, and he's going to lose. Now the white king is way, way too far on the other side of the world, vacationing, and it's time for us to break through. Step 1, g4. Now we can see that this position very much resembles the previous position that we saw. This is a great pawn structure for a pawn break, and you can imagine that the h and f pawns are going to play key roles in it. He played king c5, what else? And now f4. Again, just like before, a beautiful strike at the most defended square. We already understand what's going on. Okay, in the game he went e takes f4, But what can he do? If he was to play g pawn, then h, and we know that the h pawn just marches in. If he was not to take either pawn and try to run away or just make a move somewhere, then of course we will play just like in the other game, h4. The goal is clear. Take everything you want. I just want one pawn queening. And after takes, g3, hitting at the foundation. And after this, it's just winning. After you take my pawn, I can either take or advance. Doesn't matter. I'm just going to make a new queen and win the game. So after this, he took with the e pawn. And now, h4. I'm about to go h3. So takes. g3, getting rid of the last obstacle. And then e3. Just a beautiful way of giving everything just for the sake of making one queen. Before we go with the two last positions that are the most difficult, I'll show you a position that I'm pretty sure most of you already know. But again, it just occurred to me now that I could have shown it to you as a precursor to all this. When you see this position, and at first you think to yourself, okay, that has to be a draw. Each side has 3 pawns, each side has a king. But that is the simplest example of breakthrough. If you want to teach someone breakthrough, just showing this position. With black to move, he would have drawn immediately by playing this. Once I play this, it's a draw. Forget about it. But it's white to move, he goes b6. And again, there's a problem. You got to take it, because I'm about to take your pawn and become a queen. If you take this way, I'm going to, oops, not this way, obviously. I'm going to push my pawn. And when you have to take that, or else I'll take you, my pawn marches in and becomes a queen. Alternatively, after b6, if you take like this, then after a6, pawn takes c6, and this pawn marches in. So this is a simple way to teach even a low-rated player about breakthrough. Okay, our last two positions again are very, very difficult, but I kind of love them. And this is again, when we talked about king and pawn versus king, that's what I was leading you to. When you look at this position, you think to yourself, each side has only one pawn and one minor piece left. That's not a whole lot. But one thing is becoming very evident. The knight on a8 looks really, really trapped. If I'm going to get to go king c8, king b7, king takes knight, I'm going to win the game easily, especially because my rook pawn and my bishops are on the same queening color, this queening square. So that's going to be a win. We're going to easily win this pawn, push that king away from the corner, and queen our pawn. That is easy. White, on the other hand, has a very simple concept. He doesn't want to lose his knight, or he's saying, okay, if you want to win my knight, I want to charge you your pawn. I want to charge you your last pawn. And this is where knowing king and pawn endings is very important, because let's pretend that my system is going to be to push the pawn to a4, for example, let's say, and I'm going to play king c8. I'm after the knight. King, pawn here, king here. And now you say, look, my knight comes out, how beautiful. However, no. I'm not going to take with my pawn, and then it's going to be a simple draw. I'm rather going to take with my bishop. And after pawn takes, pawn, oops, the computer decided to play a silly move. Pawn takes, and black is winning. Why is he winning? Because he's going to have his king in front of his pawn, just like we saw. This king is just too far. So after king here, king here, king here, king here, winning. Just winning. If you go king c3, I'm going to keep clearing the way to the pawn. If you're going to go king here, I'm going to go king here. Remember, we talked about that just moments ago. And when you choose one side, I'm going to go the other. I just have to calculate, and it's going to go all the way to the queen square. All I have to do is always make sure that the pawn is not blocked, that I always have the opposition. Always choose one side and leave your opponent with the other. So, what to do? How do we draw it? Still, it's a draw, and with a very beautiful way. Watch. King d5, move 1. Now my idea is, if you go king c8, I'm going to go king c6. And my knight is going to come out either from here or from here. And at the minimum, I'm going to get your pawn, or the knight is just going to come out. So he's got to play king d7. He has to postpone capturing the knight for a moment, and now he is opposite the king. He is hoping to chase the king away. So now white plays a4. Now, if I'm going to get to play the move a5, then my next move is going to be knight b6 check. Why? Because I have the opposition, and the pawn is going to be king behind his pawn. So that's not going to work anymore. So black is forced to play the move a5. Forced. He cannot let the white pawn advance and let that knight out, because this time the pawn ending is drawn, as opposed to what we saw before. Now, what to do? King c4, the only move. King c6. At first glance, we look at this position and we think, wow, white is losing. If he moves his knight, he's going to lose it. When the king goes backwards, we're just going to go king b7, take the knight, say thank you very much. But in pawn endings and in chess, there's always wonderful opportunities. Here he plays knight to c7, take my knight. And he took it. What else? The knight is going to roam free. Now king b5. The only move to save the pawn, or else, is bishop to b6. And just when it looks like black is completely organized to win the game, white plays this little menacing move, king a6. And now the pawn can't move. If the bishop moves, I'm going to take the pawn on a5. If you move the king, I will take the bishop. And the only move to defend the bishop and move the king leads to stalemate. So white gets his draw. Beautiful composition. When you think about the minimalistic means here, just a pawn and a minor piece to each side, and still so much richness in it. It's just, I find one of the most beautiful simple combinations, or should I say compositions, that I've seen. With only little material, there's so much to it. A pawn ending that wins, a pawn ending that draws, and then a motif of stalemate to save the draw. Understood, or questions? Okay. So, our last position for the day is this one, which is number... This is a toughie, but beautiful, in my opinion. Again, it demands knowledge of king and pawn endings. There's no way you can solve it if you do not know king and pawn endings the way I described it before. So white looks like he is really in trouble here. Not only is his knight pinned and about to be captured, but this bishop might come here to the long diagonal to add insult to injury and skewer the rook and the knight. So for example, if you go king g2, and I'm going to take, and then bishop here, you're losing. So still, this is white to move and draw in a real beautiful way. Very impressive. Let me show you how it's done. I think you will enjoy it. So step one, king g3. We must move away from the pin because I'm about to lose a knight with check. Now, if you try to play bishop to b6, I'm going to go knight d3. And I'm saving the game. You attack my rook, I attack your rook. If your rook attacks my knight, I will defend it. Each going to have the same number of pawns. I mean, one pawn and one minor is going to be a draw. So black needs to play the only move that he has left. Rook takes knight, just like before. Now what to do? We know that we cannot take. So what can we do? Again, you might say, oh, maybe the rook can attack the bishop. But this is where it takes a lot more than that. The game he goes rook h5 check. If he goes just rook here, oops, sorry. If he just goes here, then I just go here. Guess what? I'm just defending my stuff. So no. So you got to go rook to h5 check. What is the point of this? The idea is to lift the king to the third rank, reasons of which you will see in a second. Now, if you go away, I'm just going to take this rook. White is going to win this game. So you got to attack my rook, and now I'm attacking your bishop. Now, if you move your rook, I'll take the bishop. It's a draw. So you must play the only move that you have. And I'm going to go rook d6 check. And the king is going to climb up. Very important to be up, because we're expecting a pawn ending. And now rook takes b6. And now both rooks are hanging. If you take my rook, I'll take your rook. So black says, hey, guess what? I might as well sack my rook before I lose it, right? At least get the pawn for it. And he goes, rook takes f3 check. And now you think, wait a minute, what just happened? After king takes rook, a takes b6, who is the opposition? Black. He's going to win the game. And therefore white plays king g2. A beautiful, elegant little move. He's saying, no, I'm not taking your rook. Of course, now, if black moves his rook, white moves his rook, it's a very simple drawn rook and pawn ending because it's a rook pawn. No way you can win it. And of course, after takes, now I take. And who is the opposition now? White does. And he draws because now it's the king in front of his pawn. Is this understood? I know it's hard. Let's take it from the top one time. I think it's really, really nice and worth it. After king g3, he has to take. White cannot afford to attack the bishop at once because the bishop just defends the king. He's got to lure that king to the third rank. Then we attack the bishop. The bishop defends the rook, his only move. And now check. The king knows to go up. If he went down, then he would lose every pawn ending. So you wouldn't have any chance to win. So here, check. And again, white plays a very smart move. King g2, he knows he cannot afford to lose the opposition. He's got to lure black to take first. When black takes first, we take the rook and draw. Okay, that's all I have for tonight. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Until next time.